So energy balance. I think energy balance is a very simple thing to understand and a difficult thing to actually implement. Okay? And it's probably one of the hardest things that we as the American population deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at the 2010 dietary guidelines, what you'll notice is there's some really good reasons why we have trouble with energy balance in our diet. And that is because what has happened to our food sources over the past 50 years, but you can narrow it down and say there's been extreme changes in the past 10 to 15 years. What are some of the things that have changed about our food system? More processed foods. More fast food. Engineered food. More access to food. We're actually producing in the United States right now, and this doesn't mean that there aren't people that are food insecure, because we know there are. But if we look at the number of calories that we're producing for people today in the United States, we're actually producing more than 1,000 calories more than what each person needs in the United States. So if we could find some way to shift some of those and say, well, you don't have any and let's give you some, and you have too many and let's take some away, that would be the magical formula. But really and truly, for every person in the United States, there's the availability of about 1,000 more calories than what we actually need. Okay. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines also pointed out very dramatically that and I have trouble wrapping my brain around this, but when I observe some of our cafes, it's not hard to see that we're also consuming, on average, between 300 and 350 calories a day of just pure sugar. Each American. Okay. Whether it's hidden in foods that are processed and we don't realize it's there, or whether it's flat out, having a soda at lunch, we're consuming between 300 and 350 calories a day of sugar. So energy balance is really difficult, and so we're seeing that on average, if you haven't heard about the obesity crisis, you're probably living not in this world. Under a rock somewhere. And it really, as simple as it sounds, it boils down to that. What is the calorie, the energy coming into the body, and what is the expenditure going out? And we do have difficulty with that. So if you're the person who is on this wild ride on a day-to-day basis of over-consuming, under-consuming, over-consuming, under-consuming, and it's not uncommon to have this happen because there's a guilt cycle associated with it as well, where, I blew it out last night, and so today I'm going to be really, really what? Good. And then being really, really good means under-eating, and then by the end of the day you're starving physically, and so you see how the cycle goes? So what do we do about that? Well, you can become an obsessive calorie counter if you want. I know some people like that. I don't prefer to hang out with them very much, but I know some people that do that. But what can you really do about this? I do think it's important that everybody, in order to move towards an energy balance where you're giving your body what it needs most of the time, not over-consuming, not under-consuming, that you kind of know your energy needs. You can go online and find a complex formula if you want to. It'll be a little bit more accurate because those formulas take into account height, weight, and age. But for our guidelines today, we're just going to use the rough and dirty formula. And that's the 10 calorie per pound rule. And what that means is that your basic energy needs during the day are approximately 10 calories per pound, assuming you're having a sedentary lifestyle. So if you're someone who's a runner or a cyclist or you're training for the next marathon, 10 calories per pound is certainly not going to support that activity, but it's just the baseline. And it's the level where you shouldn't really underconsume. You shouldn't go below that 10 calorie per pound. And then depending on what activities you're doing, you might actually need a lot more than that. Now, I think it's important also within the context of knowing your personal energy needs for balance to also think about, well, how do I then relate that to food? And again, you can run around and try to count all your calories, or you can learn some basic common values. You can learn that vegetables and fruits have fewer calories than grains and beans do. You can learn that steak and red meats have more calories than fish and chicken. You can learn that chicken has more calories if the skin is on it and you consume the skin. So you can learn things like that. You can learn, and I think you really have to apply common sense here. We're in a really critical and interesting point or place in terms of calories right now. As many of you may know, I hope you know, that we have national legislation that's pending. It's not pending, it's passed. The regulations are pending that will require calories to be posted on all foods in restaurants that are restaurant chains of 20 or more locations. And while I think there's some value in that, I also think that the public has to understand what are the drawbacks of that and what it promotes. In order to get calories onto foods, you have to have a food that's produced in the same way all the time. You have to have a specific way of doing it, and you do it that way all the time. So our manufactured food system that does things the same way all the time is being promoted by saying we have to have calories on every single thing. Whereas really, common sense would tell me that a blooming onion that's an onion dipped in batter and put in a deep fryer and served with mayonnaise, it's delicious, but my common sense should tell me that if I consume that very often, my energy balance is going to have trouble, okay? Versus me having to know that it has 25,000, I don't have 25,000, it has like 2,000 calories in it. So, you know, I'm a proponent of looking at calories, but I'm really a proponent of looking at it in terms of knowing broader numbers and making decisions. If you know you're going out for steak dinner tonight, then maybe a veggie burger or a lighter calorie meal is in line for lunch. And thinking about it in terms of how one food affects another, how one meal relates to another, instead of, you know, how bad could it possibly be, and I need to know everything about every calorie. For most people, strict calorie counting is not the way to go, and what I really prefer people to think about is to balance your energy intake and to promote regular blood glucose levels and to promote that energy level and that stabilization of mood